The subcommittee will come to order. Good morning. In April, this committee did a deep dive into the jobs gap, which is the difference between what employers need to keep the economy growing, as well as workers in the labor force. Building off our hearings last year, we held 3 separate hearings with witnesses representing local, employer, and federal perspectives on a pressing challenge facing our country. Our economy has finally turned around, and there are millions of job openings across the country. From manufacturing to technology and even automotive, these industries have rebounded and are expanding. The problem is there's a workforce shortage. Employers tell us they need workers, and with some support it is possible, and in fact critical, people on the sidelines can get back into the workforce. We heard it directly from Brian from Arizona, a young man caught up in the opioid crisis and cycling in and out of prison, who is now an electrician making $22 an hour. Brian said his job and the support of his employer turned his life around, while his employer said Brian was part of filling his need for workers in the growing home construction industry. They are an example of a remarkable win-win scenario. We heard it from David Ard of GAP about their This Way Ahead program, who said engaging disconnected and at-risk youth and young adults with their first job can be life-changing and shape their prospects for the future, regardless of industry. But we don't have time to wait. As Glenn Johnson of BASF said in a previous hearing, quote, "We can no longer hit the snooze button on the jobs gap," end quote. Our committee has jurisdiction over a number of programs which serve people on the sidelines, but today we are focused on the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, TANF, which has the express purpose of supporting the neediest among us and helping their families become self-sufficient through work. Yet, when you take a good look at the TANF program now, there is a disconnect between the purpose on paper and reality on the ground. States are spending a combined $30 billion a year through TANF, and less than half those dollars are being spent on core work activities and supportive services, which could be going to bridge the jobs gap and help American families move forward. We have an opportunity to revitalize and retrofit the TANF program to today's economy and the needs of Americans who are on the sidelines. With TANF set to expire in September, this committee must not stand down from its responsibility to reauthorize this program and help more Americans get back into the workforce. In our last hearing, I was encouraged by the ranking member's comments on the TANF program, which suggests there may be space for a meaningful bipartisan new course for the program. Mr. Davis, you said TANF is supposed to help parents work, but it is clear TANF is not doing quality workforce development with the array of services needed to get people past their barriers. I certainly hope we can work together on developing legislation to do this. So yesterday, I released draft legislation to jumpstart the conversation. This draft legislation seeks to help more Americans enter and remain in the workforce by doing 4 things. 1, expecting universal engagement and case management to address the needs of struggling families. 2, measuring work outcomes to hold states accountable. 3, refocusing TANF dollars on the truly needy, both in its allocation of funds to truly needy states and spending on truly needy families. And 4, using funds to support work and allowing states greater flexibility in customizing work or work preparation activities to fit an individual's needs for success. Overall, it strengthens program accountability, transparency, and oversight of federal dollars. As lawmakers, we have an opportunity to make real change for the American people and the American economy. We must not continue the tradition of hitting the snooze button, as it's been said, on TANF reauthorization or the American families who are trying to get ahead. We know TANF is not living up to the expectations set for it. We have the start of a proposal to fix it, and my hope is my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will not shy away from engaging. Helping struggling families and improving their outcomes is not a partisan issue. We know TANF can help address the jobs gap. Let's do something about it. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Davis, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank you for holding this hearing. Over the course of this Congress, our subcommittee has heard from a number of witnesses about approaches that are working to connect people with good jobs in our communities. The successful strategies had a number of things in common. Rather than threaten to cut off food, housing, or health care, they approached people with respect and help them overcome the structural barriers preventing them from getting good jobs. They measured their success in terms of the number of people they put on the road out of poverty, not in terms of the size of a pile of paperwork providing what those people did with every hour of every day. They helped people upgrade their skills and get work credentials. They provided supports like transportation and child care so people could work. The programs we heard from had something else in common. They did not get any support from the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, or TANF. That should be shocking because one of TANF's primary purposes is to help parents work and support their children. But it's not surprising because TANF focuses on requiring states to document exactly what activities people are engaged in and penalizes them if too many are using their time to acquire skills or credentials. That's a strong incentive to reduce the number of people who get TANF, but it's not an incentive to help families get out of poverty. We also know that TANF is providing far fewer resources to support poor children and their families than it was 20 years ago. The federal TANF grant has lost more than a third of its funding since TANF began in 1996, and states have diverted more than half of TANF funds to fill budget gaps rather than serve TANF's core purposes of supporting work, providing child care, and assisting poor families. Only 1 out of every 5 poor families gets help from TANF now, as compared to more than 60% who were helped 20 years ago. We've just begun to review the detailed TANF proposals that the chairman shared yesterday to understand how they would affect the poor children living with their parents and grandparents in our communities. Although there are provisions that I think make reasonable improvements to TANF, I am deeply concerned that the draft proposal creates clear winners and losers. I am troubled that the pattern of winners and losers closely tracks that in the new tax law, including targeting my home state of Illinois and other blue states that will lose substantial federal funding. Further, the draft permits states to reduce their spending on poor children and families, which seems like a step in the wrong direction given the already substantial decline in children in poverty being helped by TANF. These dramatic cuts are especially distressing when put in the context of recent Republican proposals to cut $17 billion from food assistance, $8.8 billion from housing, and $1 trillion from Medicaid, all harming poor families with children. Nearly 3/4 of current TANF recipients are children, usually living in poverty with their parents or grandparents. When we cut off TANF assistance or never provide it to parents and grandparents who don't earn enough, the children in those families don't have money to buy school supplies or a safe place to live or heat in the winter. Maya Angelou said, and I quote, "I've learned that making a living is not the same thing as making a life." We have an opportunity to reform TANF to help parents make a living, but we should also remember our duty to support parents, grandparents, and families in their effort to make a better life. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
Thank you. Without objection, other members' opening statements will be made a part of the record. I would like to welcome our witnesses to the table. Ms. Jennifer Meek-Eels, Executive Director of the Stark Tuscarawas Workforce Development Board. Thank you for being here. And next we have Ms. Nisha Patel, Institute Fellow at the Urban Institute. And we also have Mr. Robert Dorr, the Morgridge Fellow in Poverty Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Our witnesses are reminded to limit their oral statements to 5 minutes. All of your written statements will be included in the record. You'll see the little light there, the yellow light, as I like to say. It's kind of like a flight. When you see the yellow light, kind of bring the flight in for a smooth landing. So we'll begin now with Ms. Meek Eels, and you may begin when you are ready.
Good morning, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the Subcommittee on Human Resources. My name is Jennifer Meek Eels, and I am the Executive Director for the Stark-Tuscarawas Workforce Development Board. My workforce area is located in northeastern Ohio, with Ohio Means Job Centers located in New Philadelphia and Canton, home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I have spent 30 years working in public assistance and public workforce, including the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families and Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act programs. My job as the Executive Director is to be an expert in the local labor market and in-demand jobs, to develop relationships with employers and business organizations in the community, and as well with community colleges and training providers. I know Canton and the region's labor market and economy and what types of training people need where a job is available at the other end. As a matter of fact, this week is In-Demand Jobs Week across the state of Ohio. My local workforce area is holding a job fair in New Philadelphia on Friday with 90 employers scheduled to recruit for open positions their companies have right now. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the jobs gap. I believe that what the state of Ohio, my local workforce board, and my local county job and family services agencies are doing will address this gap. Much of what I understand this committee has discussed over the past months is that people are being left on the sidelines. On July 1st of 2016, Governor Kasich and the General Assembly implemented the Comprehensive Case Management and Employment Program through the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. This intensive case management program utilizes both TANF and WIOA funding to provide an array of services to TANF cash assistance recipients who are work eligible and under the age of 24, as well as WIOA eligible individuals under the age of 24. The program activities and performance outcomes are based primarily on the WIOA Title I Youth Program. Our Ohio Means Jobs Workforce Centers have the core principles of one-stop service delivery with co-location and access to partner and community organizations that promote workforce training and employment programs. My workforce board is business-led and acts as a broker between employers in the community and job seekers, and is a magnet for bringing together partners to provide not only training, but access to supportive services that individuals need. Workforce boards can't do it alone. We need our TANF partner agencies because they are experts in human service aspects of getting people job ready. The only way we are going to be able to address this jobs gap is if we leverage the strengths of both our human services and workforce systems. Through this intensive case management program, we have found that the TANF work participation rate and WIOA performance measures actually undermine the local workforce board's ability to partner. TANF agencies in Ohio are very focused on meeting their prescribed participation rate. They don't necessarily have the same goals as my workforce board does because their jobs are to meet the rate. Whereas my job is to get people skilled and into employment. If the programs had similar or the same outcome-based performance measures, that would go a long way in promoting partnership with TANF being complementary to the workforce system and not just another separate program. We are able to use TANF and WIOA together in spite of the government regulations being different and that their oversight comes from two separate federal agencies. But it has been difficult and required a lot of effort to execute. The state of Ohio painstakingly created a service matrix to bridge the activities under WIOA to the participation allowances under TANF, and it has helped the case managers better identify how these two federal programs can align. Much concern now is how can we make this all work together without missing our measures or having an audit finding. What would make our ability to bring people in from the sidelines more effectively is to make it easier for agencies and these funding streams to partner through program alignment around allowable activities and performance. I want to underscore this point about case management. Person-centered case management is important, and we need flexibility to customize activities to meet people where they are. That engagement, that relationship is the key to success. My Ohio Means Job Center was able to assist Emily through a plan with her case manager to become a welder. Emily excelled as a student and had a great relationship with her case manager. She completed training in November of 2016 and immediately found employment at a company in Canton as a welder for $15 an hour. As of this year, she now has a child, but she continues to work, and she's already gotten a raise and is making $16 an hour. Unlike many other anti-poverty programs, the case management program we've built in Ohio engages participants in meaningful employment and training activities. And the bottom line is this: it's a win-win. We are helping individuals in our community be successful and get back on their feet, and we're also providing a skilled workforce for our employers. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Patel, you may begin when you're ready.
Good morning, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on my insights on how to strengthen the TANF program. I have spent more than 2 decades designing and implementing programs to increase economic opportunities for low-income families. I previously served as the director of the Office of Family Assistance, which is the HHS office that administers TANF. But as importantly, or maybe more importantly, I have spent much of my career talking directly with families. The voices of children and parents are too often left out of these conversations about solutions, but it is their experiences that inform my testimony today. I want to emphasize that the views I express today are my own and should not be attributed to any organization where I've been employed, their boards, or their funders. So first, some context. If our goal is to address child poverty, which I know the draft bill attempts to do, and as part of that, we want to encourage parents to work, we have to recognize the realities that families face. There is a persistent negative and stigmatizing narrative about people who receive cash assistance that does not come close to matching the reality. In my experience, parents want to work because they want to set a good example for their children and they want a better future for them. I heard this loud and clear just last month in my conversations with young parents in rural Garrett County, Maryland, on the West Virginia border, and just this past weekend with families from Los Angeles in Congresswoman Chu's district who are part of the Parent Voices group in California. But research shows that low-income parents often face challenges to entering the labor market and to retaining employment. It's been 22 years since Congress established TANF, and a lot has changed since then. We cannot expect a program designed in the economic, demographic, and scientific context of the mid-1990s and for an entirely different generation of families will be relevant and effective in 2018 and into the future. There are many problems with TANF and many points of view about how to fix them. But it does seem clear to me that there is room for bipartisan agreement, and in the interest of making efficient use of the subcommittee's time, I'll focus on those areas. And I'll focus on solutions that put children at the center and strengthen parents' job opportunities. So before I go to solutions, I want to share 7 facts about the current state of TANF. Fact 1, TANF provides income support to a small number of families and primarily supports children. As I have often reminded people over the years, the F in TANF stands for families. Yet we somehow seem to keep leaving children out of the conversation altogether. Fewer than 1.4 million families receive TANF, and that is compared to 8 million families with children we have living in poverty in this country. Half of those TANF cases are child-only cases, meaning there is no financial support that is provided to parents or sometimes the grandparents who are caring for children. More than 70% of people receiving TANF are children. Most of them are children under 12, and the largest share are children under 6. So I just want to be very clear, we are talking about little kids, or at least we should be. Fact 2, share of families who receive TANF has fallen drastically since 1996. Fact 3, the support that these children receive is very meager. In Mississippi, the maximum benefit for a family of 3 is $170 a month. That's $42 a week. Fact 4, inflation has eroded the value of the block grant by over a third, as Ranking Member Davis shared. Fact 5, as the chairman noted, in 2016, under half of TANF funds were used for core benefits and services. Fact 6, many states' spending priorities move TANF downstream, away from prevention. This puts young children at risk of harm and deprivation and can have negative impacts on their development. Fact 7, there is a lack of focus on employment and training that's linked to good jobs. Most good jobs require at least some training beyond high school, but nearly 40% of parents of children on TANF do not even have a high school education. So, now for the solutions. 5 solutions. 1, make child poverty reduction an explicit goal of TANF and require the spending to be targeted to low-income families. For example, 200% of poverty or below. 2, set a floor for spending on core benefits and services, and by that I mean employment and training, cash assistance, and childcare. 3, prohibit states from claiming non-governmental third-party expenditures as maintenance of effort. This allows states to reduce their own spending on programs to address child poverty. 4th, expand education and training to create access to good jobs. 5th, support demonstration projects focused on employment outcome measures as well as on whole family approaches that focus simultaneously on achieving parental employment outcomes and child well-being outcomes. In conclusion, any changes to the program have got to keep our eyes on the prize, which is children living in poverty. I very much appreciate the subcommittee's interest in this issue and the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dorr, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the committee. My testimony this morning is informed by almost 20 years of working in social services programs in New York State and New York City. By taking steps to improve TANF, this committee dedicates itself to making a good program even better. TANF has demonstrated how to replace welfare with work while providing a safety net for families facing difficult circumstances. This remains true. Nonetheless, even good programs can be improved, and TANF could be by recommitting itself to the principles that made it successful: effective work engagement activities that move applicants and recipients towards regular earnings with a focus on employment as the primary desired outcome. After more than 20 years, TANF can improve by refocusing the program on engagement to help more Americans enter and remain in the workforce. Many states have exploited loopholes to get around the work requirement while diverting TANF funds for other purposes. TANF has an opportunity to fix this problem by limiting spending on assistance to families below 200% of the poverty level. It should do so. And while states should enjoy some flexibility in how they use federal funds, they must be sure to keep their eyes on the prize and prioritize programs that will help TANF recipients into work. TANF should revitalize its work requirement by expecting universal engagement and incorporating outcome measures that focus on what matters most, moving individuals into sustainable work. It should also make an affirmative statement about the value of case management. Key decisions about services and benefits should be made at the local level, and caseworkers should have access to a wide range of tools, including programs funded beyond TANF, because different families face different challenges. Reforms that focus on measuring outcomes are also critical to TANF's success. TANF would do well to enact dashboard alerts that will catch the attention of the Department of Health and Human Services when certain states report too many work-eligible individuals with 0 hours of participation in work-related activities. And the work participation rate, the current outcome measure which has been exploited by state manipulation, could be replaced with measures centering on unsubsidized employment after an individual leaves the TANF rolls, which would better reflect successful transitions to employment. While I have concerns about TANF agencies' ability to ensure that former enrollees remain employed months down the line, some form of job placement and retention measure is a welcome innovation. Transparency and accountability are critical in order to shed light on states' engagement of their caseload and ensure that they are moving towards desired outcomes. And I applaud the direction of the draft bill in advancing these values. However, I do have some concerns about outcome measurement that I believe are worth raising. Employment is an appropriate outcome because TANF aspires to grow capacity to reduce dependency. But the program also must make engagement of current recipients an important goal in and of itself, beyond its role in leading to earnings down the road. As a former administrator of TANF in New York, I know that state flexibility is a cornerstone of its success. But that doesn't mean there shouldn't be limitations. States must be held accountable for engaging their caseload with activities that really do lead to work, and they should answer to federal administrators to ensure that this is the case. This should include tracking enrollee attendance, as well as reporting on how state initiatives are achieving core TANF objectives. While it would be good for each state and the federal administration to negotiate performance targets that allow states some flexibility, in the absence of a work participation rate, states should be required to provide baseline measures to ensure that incremental improvements can be compared to current outcomes. Any reform should also maintain current funding for the TANF program. As I mentioned, TANF isn't the only show in town. Nearly all families receiving TANF assistance are also receiving Medicaid and SNAP benefits, just to name a few. And while TANF, after adjusting for inflation, now spends about 2/3 of what it did in 1996, federal spending on programs like Medicaid, SNAP, the Earned Income Tax Credit, and the Refundable Child Tax Credit have greatly increased. Effectively, we've moved from funding non-work to making work pay. The current funding structure has been a key to TANF's unique success, and any accounting for its decrease in value must acknowledge the array of other programs that assist low-income Americans. Finally, the process for allocating resources to each state should be done in a way that targets poverty more directly and more fairly, and to its credit, the discussion draft makes progress on this point as well. Each state's share of funding should be determined at least in part by their current levels of poverty. When this committee focused on work in the 1990s, we saw great reductions in poverty and improved outcomes for children and families. It's time to reaffirm those principles, and I think this proposal moves us in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your insight and your testimony and expertise. Ms. Meek-Eels, in your testimony you talk about the different performance measures used in WIOA and TANF and how the different measurement systems make it difficult to coordinate and make the best use of those resources. We often talk about, it's been said that we need to put the human back in human services. And do you think that aligning these outcome measures across programs will lead to better case management? And can you tell us what aligned measures in case management look like on the ground from your experience? Go ahead. You want to turn on your microphone there.
Got it. Thank you. Yes, I think what we've experienced in the past with some of the issues between the work participation requirements around TANF and the workforce performance pieces that are tied to WIOA is that when we're working with a TANF eligible individual, many times they have a work site to go to, or they have a participation requirement that's 20 or 30 hours a week. And that may interfere with really what is a barrier that they may need to be working with through to have removed. So for example, someone may need to be working on a GED, but they only have so long to be able to do that. Or somebody might have, be at a point where they need to be doing intensive job search, but under TANF, there are restrictions on how long they can engage in that activity. So a lot of times when we're trying to do more intensive work with an individual to do barriers, removal of the barriers, and also to make sure that they're in something that is going to make them more job ready, the TANF work participation requirement that drives that funding mechanism is really a deterrent for getting at the root of really what is involved with that individual and making that family prosper.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dorr, as a former practitioner who successfully helped get folks on TANF back to work in New York, both at the state level and in New York City, I know you agree that flexibility aspects of a TANF are important. Certainly New York City is different from rural Nebraska, as anyone can imagine. But given the ways in which some states have diverted TANF dollars to other purposes, which you have pointed out, it might make sense to put some guardrails so that funds are focused on the core purpose of TANF that I think everyone has touched on here. In Ms. Patel's written testimony, she suggests some guardrails which mirror those of the discussion draft. For example, adding child poverty reduction as an explicit purpose, putting a floor on spending on core benefits and services, and limiting the funds to families under 200% of poverty. This leads me to believe there's room for some bipartisan work on improving TANF. Are these the type of guardrails that will help TANF be more focused on helping struggling Americans enter and remain in the workforce? And is the program at a point in time that these and other changes are needed?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that we are. I think there's bipartisan agreement from both conservatives and liberals that dollars devoted for the very needy in TANF are not being spent on the very needy, and that it would be the existing caseload. And so, given the job situation and the concern about bringing people into employment, We need to impose certain, I think you use the phrase guardrails, but restrictions on the use of TANF dollars so they truly are devoted to the most in need in the various states. It's not to say that what we've done in the past is all bad. It's just that I think we've gotten away from focusing on the most in need, and I think if this legislation moves in that direction, that would be a good thing.
Very good. Well, it's been interesting learning how and what some states have done in terms of diverting some honorable expenditures.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but probably at the expense of the neediest among us. I mean, it is astonishing to me that these dollars have been diverted the way they have been. So
right, and the measurement has been allowed to be manipulated so that states are able to satisfy the effective work participation rate without really engaging the core caseload, and that's a problem.
And checking the box without being as effective as we know.
Right, through various manipulations, either the caseload reduction credit or the maintenance of effort requirement that's allowed states to what's called buy down their rate, and then I think avoid having to engage families and families that are in need of additional attention.
Very good. Thank you for your responses, and I now recognize Ranking Member Davis for 5 minutes for any questions he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of the witnesses for their testimony. Ms. Patel, in my congressional district, nearly 1 in 4 children live in poverty. In the state of Illinois, cash assistance provides an abysmal 25% of the federal poverty level, leaving poor children in abject poverty. Nationwide, TANF is now only serving 20% of poor children, as opposed to over 60% when TANF began. Is there evidence that increasing the number of poor children receiving TANF assistance and increasing the amount of their benefits give them a better chance at what we would call a good life?
Yes, thank you for the question, Ranking Member Davis. Absolutely. We've got a body of research that shows that investing resources in young children especially, so for example, there's research that shows that as little as an additional amount of $3,000 a year for young children makes a big difference in their future earning outcomes, so their earnings as adults. And so that's an investment in them right now as young children, but also in our future workforce. And I actually want to applaud the state of Nebraska, which is one of the few states, the chairman's state, which has actually increased its benefit level, which it did so in 2015 for families on TANF, and I think out of recognition of this. And so even that small amount of money can make a huge difference to children that are living in deep poverty. So absolutely.
When parents, let's say a family, might lose their TANF assistance, if this should happen, how does that negatively affect the children?
I mean, you know, losing even that meager amount of assistance, that is the difference between being able to pay for laundry detergent, pay for school shoes, pay for school supplies, pay for clothes that are we all, I think many of us take for granted being able to afford, but negatively affects children's development, and that access to resources and financial stress also impacts parents' mental health. When parents are stressed, that impacts children, it impacts their relationship with their children, which can affect children's development, which, that matters for that family, but it also matters for society as a whole, right? We can either invest resources on the front end or we can pay a lot more on the back end when families end up in crisis, when families end up potentially with physical and mental health issues, when children end up, because of, neglect stems from lack of basic needs. So not being able to have money to pay for food, shelter, and clothing, 75% of cases in the child welfare system are neglect. And so it would be wise, I think, to try to avoid that by providing at least some basic income support, particularly to families with young children on the front end.
Thank you. Mr. Dorr, you suggest that in some instances, the poorest or the neediest individuals are not in the pipeline or not connected to get the services. How do we improve that and try and make sure that those with the greatest need are the ones who are being served first?
By holding states accountable and finding a way to monitor engagement in some casework, some activity that the agency is attempting to engage with recipients of assistance that leads to work. And I think there's been an ability of states to avoid that with the remaining caseload. And that's been a shame because the remaining caseload is often individuals and families most in need. And while in the beginning, maybe we had very high caseloads and we could help many, many people, as Nisha said, who wanted to go to work and could go to work and proved that they could go to work and they wanted to go to work. But now we have a slightly different caseload, and I think that a program designed 20 years ago maybe needs to address and get us back to addressing that core group that is in need of, I think, much greater engagement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Walorski for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to our witnesses for being here today to share your perspective on the jobs gap. I worked on SNAP for 2 years in the Ag Committee, serving as the chair of the Nutrition Subcommittee when the committee was conducting a comprehensive top-to-bottom review of the program. I'm grateful to now serve on the Ways and Means Committee, where we have been examining and working to improve programs like TANF and McPhee. TANF, SNAP, and the other programs that make up government's safety net are essential for giving people who have fallen on hard times a chance to get back on their feet. Some programs, like McPhee, help try to prevent people from falling to begin with. One thing that has stood out to me as I've looked over these programs over the past couple of years is the power of human interaction. We've heard earlier this year from a young man who battled opioid addiction and stints in prison, but turned his life around once somebody stood beside him who believed in him and gave him a job and a sense of family. Last year, we heard from a bright young lady who overcame homelessness and self-doubt that had built up after a few attempts at college until she had a mentor beside her in a job training program who checked on her and talked her through tough times. There's no one path into poverty, I know that. It's a Rubik's Cube of issues, and it's tough to solve on your own. Some can, but having someone alongside seems to help improve the odds. I introduced a bill this year, along with my fellow Hoosier, Senator Todd Young, to do just that. It's called the Coordinating Assistance for TANF Recipients Act. Sets aside money for demonstration projects to improve case management for TANF recipients with rigorous evaluation on the back end to make sure they're delivering good outcomes. The TANF discussion draft was released yesterday, puts an emphasis on case management, which I think is a step in the right direction. I look forward to working with the chairman as we continue to refine the bill. Ms. Meek-Eels, you're on the ground in Ohio. I was fascinated by your testimony. Can you talk more about case management strategies that you think are most effective? And I was listening to you with great intent because you seem to be going down the road that I have gone down, discovering that we're going to have to re-engage people. These are not just numbers. They're not just folks adding into a database. These are real people that need real help with real humans. Can you speak to that and what you're doing in casework in Ohio case management?
Yes, thank you. I think the issue around case management is so important because you're right. People can't just be handed off. They're not just a number. I think we're finding that individuals, again, as we're working with them, you establish that relationship and that rapport, and then they are more likely to share more information about themselves that may get down to the real root of why they're having difficulty finding or maintaining employment. That's what we want to get at. And so when we're looking at, again, barrier removal, we need to drill down to see, is there a family issue? Is the individual having issues with mental health or drug addiction, alcohol addiction, so that we can provide services and connect that individual with services that will help them. But the main piece about case management is we're not just handing off, we're not just making a referral to an agency. That case manager is tied to that individual, and they're working with them for that progress, because let's face it, it's a scary thing to admit that you need counseling or that you have an issue that needs addressed. And when we're working with families in this nature, it is about the children and making sure that that family is stable. So the case management process that we've engaged in, I know in my local area, we've worked with our Mental Health and Recovery Services Board very closely when we kicked this off. I wanted our case managers to have some type of foundational basis for what they're doing. So we engaged in what's called the TIPS model, Transitions to Independence Process model, where we're looking at emotional and behavioral underlying pieces that we need to work on. So again, I think that rather than just handing somebody off and making a referral and still expecting them to work, in a participation aspect for 20 or 30 hours a week, that's not getting us these people off the sidelines. Our employers are hungry for people, and we have people that want to work, but they can't work if they're experiencing all this trauma and they're never getting over that.
So do you use outcome measures like what this discussion draft is talking about, like job placements and those kinds of things as you look overall at your program in Ohio?
Yes.
What would those be?
The foundational basis for the Comprehensive Case Management Program in Ohio is the WIOA Title I performance metrics for youth. Mm-hmm. So we are looking at employment after second quarter, fourth quarter. We're looking at skill gains. We're looking at those types of measures that, again, are very directly related to employment. We're looking at training completion. We're looking...
We're going to be out of time, but I thank you so much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I will add we are going to go to the 2-to-1 questioners here given attendance. So with that, I will recognize Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for being here today to share your testimony. I'm from the state of Michigan, and we are no stranger to this issue and the need for finding ways to close that jobs gap. But like most Americans, I was very thrilled to see last week that the national unemployment is down to 3.9%. That's the lowest unemployment rate since 2000 and marked the 91st consecutive month of job gains, which is just tremendous news. Businesses across the nation are expanding, hiring new employees and increasing wages. In my district, for example, Oakland County has a 3.4% unemployment rate. Livingston County is at 3.5%, and Ingham County is at 4%. And it's just gotten so much better in Michigan, and this is wonderful news. As I travel across my district and visit with job creators, one thing I hear from time and time again is the challenge that they're having filling the open positions, which is probably a good problem to have. The economy's starting to perk now we got to find people to fill these positions. And while many are willing to provide training, flexibility benefits, and competitive salaries, they still have difficulties for some reason filling the openings. So it's extremely important that as we talk about the 6 million people who have left the workforce that are still on the sidelines, to understand that there's something else going on here, and we have to figure out how to address so that our economy can continue to grow. Otherwise, we have a great opportunity and we're missing out on it. So in our last hearing, we heard testimony from groups and organizations who aggressively are looking for new ways, innovative ways to address this jobs gap issue. One of them was an employer in my district, or employs many constituents in my district, Fiat Chrysler. And they found that, based on their testimony, the high rate of absenteeism in many cases was often related to problems finding stable child care. So they did something innovative. They developed a partnership with the United Way to help working parents secure reliable child care. And so, Ms. Meek-Eels, I hope I pronounced that right. Okay. Have you found that child care is something individuals in your program need help with? And is that a supportive service that you provide, or do you partner with the TANF agency to do so?
Okay, in Ohio, yes, our TANF agency also oversees the subsidized child care program. So we have a very close relationship with our TANF County Job and Family Services agencies. But it's really interesting that you asked about child care, because in my area also, child care providers are in demand. And so one of the things that we're doing with a contracted provider called the Early Childhood Resource Center is we are working with them to refer TANF work-eligible individuals that are interested in getting into early care and education. And what we're doing with them is we're enrolling them in a 9-month program through this case management umbrella, and they are getting a CDA, a child development associate credential. And that's a stepping stone for them to then work in a child care setting. And so that has really been a great program for us so far. I think we're in the 4th cohort with that program, and we're having a lot of success with individuals getting through that 9 months of both training and work experience. That's how you get the CDA credential. And so again, it's not about having somebody just gain some skills at a work site for 20 or 30 hours a week. It's about incorporating training with that work experience so that they have an opportunity to have a job at the end of this. So we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We are providing an opportunity for people to work, but we're also filling the need for our child care centers and some of our in-home providers to have qualified and talented child care workers.
So you would agree that this is important, child care is an important piece of this legislation, or should be?
Child care is critical.
Yeah,
definitely.
It's conspicuously missing right now from the draft bill, but I'm looking forward to working with the chairman and the committee to address that issue. We've limited amount of time. I want to talk to you about apprenticeships too. I recently visited a Clarkston, Oakland school technical campus to learn more about their efforts to get students involved in the apprenticeship program. As someone who runs a workforce, Ms. Meek Eels, or a development board, can you speak to the value of apprenticeships and maybe provide an example of how they might work at your level?
Apprenticeships are extremely valuable. What I can say there is we've had some of our trade union and apprenticeship providers come in and talk with our youth program providers, because that's one thing too that I think we've been missing is our young people overall need to be better connected and understand what an apprenticeship is and how they can get training and credentials without having any debt, and again, fill some of these in-demand jobs in the skilled trades.
Thank you. Next we have Mr. Doggett. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm encouraged by your remarks and that of each of our witnesses this morning, focusing on how we can assure that the federal funds that have already been appropriated are directed toward helping people get into the workforce in meaningful jobs. I believe that I reflect on several years ago when I was serving as the ranking member here and met directly with then Chairman Ryan in this committee, asking that we do more to see that the states use the dollars that they get for work, for child care, the other core purposes. I recognize that it's unlikely under a Republican administration we will see more federal resources devoted to helping people escape poverty, but we ought to at least assure that the dollars that we've been spending achieve those core purposes. My concern is that I would agree with the rhetoric that TANF has become a giant welfare program and that some people can't get off the dole. It's just my contention that the people that can't get off the dole are some governors and some legislators, largely Republican governors in the South, who use money that we all agreed was going to go to help people get from welfare to work, and instead they use it for most everything else. And I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, that we can accomplish, since your discussion draft just came out a few hours ago and we weren't involved in preparing it and haven't had a chance to review it thoroughly, but I can accomplish the objective that I have in a bill with a single page, and that is to simply require Texas to do what Nebraska does, require Michigan to do what Ohio does in terms of using the resources from the federal government for work purposes. In Texas, we are meeting the needs of about 4% of poor children, 4 out of 100 through TANF. And at present, we have about 15 or 16% of the monies that the federal government sends down to Texas to get people into the workforce, about 15, 16 cents, near last, dead last, I think. The other portions of the money go for other things. They're used to plug state budget gaps. Sometimes they're used to enable tax cuts. They're used to do anything other than to accomplish the original congressional objective, which is to help people get in, not just to a dead-end job where they get a few hours and they're cut out after a few months, but a path to work out of poverty. And if that is the objective of your bill, I think you're going to find a willingness to work with you to achieve that objective, because that's what Welfare to Work was all about. I voted for it in the Clinton administration. Unfortunately, I think it's largely been a failure in both protecting children who cannot work. That was the whole purpose of the old Aid for Dependent Children program. Some impaired individuals, but those who could work are not given the opportunities under the law to get the education and training they need, and we're not monitoring the success of this program based on how many people really did get out of poverty, as Chairman Davis said, and how long did they stay out of poverty. So if we can make that the focus, I think we have the basis for meaningful welfare reform. I don't think, and I understand this is one part of your bill, that you can accomplish that and get a state that's been on the dole under this program for so long and is so accustomed to using the money for anything else other than what it's intended for, just a substitute for prior state programs. I don't think you can accomplish that by simply requiring a match. And again, you need to look no further than Texas and other states. Texas was offered 100 cents on the dollar to provide health care for its poor people through Medicaid. It didn't want to have anything to do with that program. And so simply having a matching program will not get us where we need to be. Texas will continue diverting the money and will not accept new federal dollars to help its people escape poverty. Ms. Patel, I did want to ask you about education opportunities under existing law and whether additional flexibility is needed if the goal is to really move people into long-term, well-paying jobs.
Yes, thank you for the question, Congressman. Absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges, and I, as the director of the Office of Family Assistance, we worked with every state in the nation, all of the tribes, territories, consistently heard from states of all people from all political stripes, the education and training limitations in TANF are a problem. So within TANF under current law, for if in Ohio they'd like to have people get education and training for in-demand jobs that employers aren't able to fill right now, people can only receive up to states can only count up to 12 months of vocational educational training. So if it's a 2-year degree, forget it. There's no incentive for states to provide that training, right? Because it doesn't count to the work participation requirements, and only 30% of the caseload that's counting toward those rates can be in vocational educational training. So that's another limitation. And then the other issue that I hear consistently from administrators is that it's an administrative nightmare. It's a bunch of bean counting and paperwork, which taking all that staff time is taking taxpayer money that perhaps could otherwise be spent on paying for education or training. So it's a real problem.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And if we can just note for the record, I know time's up, that Ms. Meek Ellis is nodding very affirmatively on these issues.
I noticed
and
that.
I'm sure has had similar experience in Ohio with both of them. Thank you very much.
Well, there's valuable input here in response from our witnesses. I wish we had unlimited resources of time. But in the interest of time, we will move forward and I think have further opportunity for responses. Next, we recognize Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I take sort of a step sideways and sort of, I want to first get my head around not only just TANF, but what resources are there for our brothers and sisters, let's use the threshold, that are that 200% in poverty and below. Mr. Doar, I believe the Institute a couple years ago tried to do an articulated list of both state, local, private, different types of resources that were parts of our community that were meant to help our brothers and sisters who we refer to as poor.
There are a lot, and sometimes when we talk about only one program, we miss the full picture. And Medicaid is by far the largest and has grown dramatically. SNAP is also large, food stamps, it's grown dramatically. You, Congress and the administration just recently added significant new dollars to child care, block grant available to the states. And there's civil society, states and localities. I think it's not about insufficient amounts of effort with regard to dollars. In this case, it's about insufficient attention to a particular group that we've are not engaging successfully enough.
I want to circle back to that. I have a fixation that technology, the ability to do case management, the ability to a fractured system where I have an administrator of this program, an administrator of this program, administrator of this program, and are you seeing any states or localities that are doing a quality job creating almost a single portal?
Yes, there are been a lot of effort to sort of have no wrong door and interoperability where applicants and recipients of various forms of assistance can get connected to all of what they're eligible for. My concern is that there hasn't been enough attention to also getting them connected to a path toward employment.
Yeah, but that should be the sort of holistic circle.
That should be an objective for all of the programs.
And I can give this more, and I don't mean this as an anecdote because it's actually something we're working on. We have Goodwill Industries in Arizona. It's actually huge in Maricopa County. They do a terrific job in job training programs, but they were seeing their data that they had this unusual outlier. People would finish the job training and then not show up for the job interviews. And when there was some survey work done, it was transportation issues. Turns out an organization like Lyft basically said, we'll take care of it, and we'll do it for a fraction of the cost, and we'll actually give you a geotag that we actually drop them off at their job interview. And so when I'm speaking of sort of a holistic, I mean more than just programs. There's technology out there that can help us in our coordination of transportation, of getting to the medical appointment, to actually child care, and the documentation of everything from a babysitting co-op to subsidized child care.
When we had Goodwill in New York also, they were a job placement program, and we were very generous with transportation assistance. And my view is that when a TANF program is forced to engage people and guardrails are put up with regard to the spending, they're going to come up with solutions like that to get back to the core objective, which is help people get into work. But they've been allowed to not have to think that way.
Yeah, and maybe, and I know, Mr. Chairman, you are working on a discussion draft and mechanisms. I have sort of a passion of, do we need to do a little more thought work on, could TANF also be sort of that hub of coordination of the different benefits and also sort of community organizations for the cascade of how we help someone make it back into society? If you actually look at our unemployment data, and being someone that fixates on some of the line items in U6, there's wonderful things happening in our society. Absolutely. We're seeing data of marginalized populations from the last decade are finding jobs, felons finding jobs, long-term unemployment, or long-term unemployed finding work. So how do we find our brothers and sisters who, either because of child care, of certain types of disabilities, of just not being whatever the impairment may be? And my fear is we have sort of a fractured system where we're competing against each other.
Well, I think that we want all the programs to be focused on that. And I think if you put it all in TANF, I think that wouldn't necessarily be right. Not everyone
I'm less TANF. I'm just, who is the traffic controller? And that's where you use the term sort of single portal.
The State Commissioner of Social Services often has the largest role, has the largest programs under their bailiwick.
I know I'm slightly over time, but for the three, if I wanted to do some research and see who's doing it the best in our society, which state, which community has done it most elegantly?
I'll give you some ideas on that. I'm sure Nisha and we all could.
You will have the opportunity to respond later. I certainly appreciate your feedback, though. Next, we have Mr. Reichert, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. From Schweikert to Reichert. That's a little confusing. I'm just an old retired cop who happened to end up in Congress. Oldest of 7 kids, grew up in a home of domestic violence, ran away from home. And I think you'll find that a lot of people on this dais have got, we all have a story. And so I think it's good for you to know a little piece of that from me, because we do understand, the complicated problem that we're trying to deal with, not only from this dais as professionals, but also from personal experiences in our own lives and in our own community. But I've added up the years. I did this in the last subcommittee hearing, Mr. Chairman. I've added up the years of experience here in our witness panel. And I wasn't very good at math in high school, but it looks to me like we have about 70 years of experience, and the last panel we had was 50 years of experience. And so I as an old cop, I want to go back and just kind of try to figure out where we've been and where where we are today and where we're headed. So 30 years ago, in your case, Ms. Meeks Eels, what did you have performance measures 30 years ago? And 20 years ago, I'm assuming that the other two witnesses had some performance measures. I was in 1972 on patrol. My sergeant had performance measures for me in 1972. As the sheriff, I was part of the committee in King County in Seattle to end homelessness in 10 years. And that started in 1997. Of course, we were unsuccessful. It's worse today. What are we doing wrong? We had performance measures. We're looking at performance measures. We've got programs in place. People need help. What else do we need to think about? I mean, we're program after program after program, money after money after money. I want to help people too, but I want to really be able to help people. Anybody on the panel?
Mr. Reichert, I think we've done a good job at providing an enormous array of material aid to struggling Americans, but we've not done as good a job at helping them move into employment and earn their own success. Now, we've done some of that has done well, but it's not as well as it should be. And TANF, while it had a good beginning, has faded a little bit in that objective of getting people to work with the existing caseload it currently has. So I think we're good at providing aid. We're not so good at helping people get the skills and into employment as we'd like to, and I think we have to work on that.
I was really interested, Ms. Patel, in your comments about prevention, because it really goes back to the family foundation, in my opinion. Where have we fallen apart here? I know that TANF penalizes married couples, so how do we, what's your idea of prevention? To me, it's growing the family, strengthening the family.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple of things. I mean, one is just that investment of income on the front end so families don't spiral into crisis, right? And I think employment is super important, education and training are important, but they're not enough. Mm-hmm. So family stability matters. We
have children that are growing up, young people now, that don't have, as we heard in the last panel, soft skills.
Right.
Whatever happened, I mean, in my generation, of course, you can tell it's been a while. We grew up, even in the situation I described, we were taught to work hard, to persist, and keep on going. What's happened with our young people not even learning soft skills? Show up on time for work, for crying out loud.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. What we've been calling soft skills for a while now, the brain science. So I mentioned a lot has changed in 20 years. So behavioral and brain science have evolved. And so one of the things that some of the most cutting edge organizations are doing is this movement from not just case management to much more of a coaching model, where we look at what motivates individuals' behavior. How do we help them? So the word that's being used is kind of a technical...
You gotta break the cycle, though. So the young people you're working with will have a family. We can't let this continue. You know, they have a family. They need to teach the soft skills, right? So-called soft skills.
No, absolutely. And then one of the ways that we do that is through new methodologies. And actually, there's an organization right in your district, the Children's Home Society in Washington State, that is using some of these methodologies that are based in brain science, and they're working in an intergenerational way to get exactly what you're talking about, right? They're working with the parents, but also with the young children simultaneously.
Yeah, I just think we have a very, very deep problem that we are not really, sinking our teeth into.
I think, too, if I could offer just quickly, in Ohio, we've had the opportunity to work through Health and Human Services with Mathematica. And one of the things that they are working with us on is kind of a brain science model called Goal For It. And what it does is it really looks at goal setting and incorporates the case management around that so that people are kind of relearning the soft skills and they're accountable for what's happening in their lives. So again, the case management piece is really a foundational piece for transition.
Thank you. Next, recognize Ms. Chu.
Thank you. Ms. Patel, yesterday the Republicans on this committee released a discussion draft to make changes to TANF. While we've had a limited time to review this draft and thoroughly analyze its impacts, one thing is clear: the proposal involves shifting dollars from one state to another, and shifting those dollars from states that may have invested significant TANF dollars in helping families with basic assistance, work support, work activities, and childcare. My state of California is a prime example. California's made significant investments in providing this cash assistance, work support, and childcare, and as a result, it has reduced the percentage of children in poverty, but the sheer number of children that is in poverty is actually the greatest number in the whole United States. It is 1.8 million children, and yet, if this shift occurs, then the federal share of TANF dollars could be cut by nearly $420 million. Now, I believe more money should be invested in TANF. Actually, TANF has lost 1/3 of its value because it's not been adjusted for inflation since 1996. I think we have to reduce child poverty rates in every state, but not by taking money from one state and giving it to the other. So, Ms. Patel, can you discuss what potential impacts on California would be if this proposal is passed and TANF dollars are given to other states?
Yeah, and I've only had a few hours to look at the proposed legislation, but what I'll say is while California isn't perfect, it actually currently does the best job of any state of actually reaching children in poverty with TANF. And so I would fear that these kinds of cuts would mean that California might go from being one of the best to being one of the worst in terms of children who are so poor that they qualify for TANF. And I would worry if California had to make those over $400 million in cuts, they'd have to slash the core benefits and services that we're talking about. Slashing cash assistance, slashing employment and training, slashing childcare, which could mean that children would be harmed and deprived of basic needs and parents deprived of the opportunity to get the skills they need to get those good jobs we've all been talking about. I was just looking at the press coverage from this last week. California is traditionally a state that is invested in its people. It's probably why it's now the fifth, last week this just happened, right? It's now the 5th largest economy in the world. It would really be a shame to see them disinvest in people, and given its size, because the population is so big, California, what happens in California impacts the entire nation. There's such a large share of vulnerable children there. I had the privilege of, I mentioned in my opening statement, of talking with parents who are part of Parent Voices. I was in Los Angeles over the weekend. And one of their big areas of focus right now is to trying to get California to do what Nebraska did, to actually increase the level of the TANF benefit given the extremely high cost of living. And a cut like this could set back years of progress for those families who, when I speak with them, they all want to work. They just need a little extra help while they try to get their rung on that, foot on that rung of that first ladder out of poverty. So it gives me serious concern.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I'd like to follow up with talking about cash assistance. TANF is the only federal program that provides cash assistance to low-income families, yet most TANF funds no longer actually go towards cash assistance. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, states are spending only 24% of TANF dollars on cash assistance. In fact, states are overwhelmingly transferring these funds to other programs such as child welfare, child care, juvenile justice, and transportation. So can you tell us why cash assistance is a critical support for low-income families, why it is important to lift children out of poverty, and what steps federal government could take to incentivize states to invest more money in cash assistance?
Yeah, I mean, cash, while there are other programs, cash provides the ultimate autonomy for families. And if we want families to, be able to kind of, some people like the word self-sufficient, I would say be economically secure, families are best positioned to make the decisions about how best to meet their family needs every day. And cash is the only way to pay for basic things like rent, like diapers, like shampoo, laundry detergent, kids' shoes, school supplies, gas to get to work. You can't use SNAP or other benefits to pay for those things. You get a flat tire and you've got to go to work. How are you going to pay for a new tire? So it's the only way that families can meet these basic needs. And thinking about what I think the focus should be young children. Parents also have to pay for books, learning materials. And together, these kinds of educational tools that I think many middle-class families take for granted, right? You want kids to be in sports and have a uniform or have new sneakers. But you also need healthcare, nutrition, and stable housing. All of these things together impact children's development. And as I mentioned before, the financial burdens that cause parental stress end up negatively, in fact, impacting children and the relationship between parents and children.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And next, I recognize Mr. LaHood 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today and what all of you do in your own capacities on this issue. Mr. Doar, I want to start with you. My understanding is right now states are spending about 1/3 of TANF dollars on what we would consider core assistance and work support activities focused on helping individuals find employment. However, many states seem to be doing very little to help welfare recipients move into work. Meanwhile, we've got what I would describe as a jobs gap, and our economy right now is flourishing. You know, the statistics that are quoted often, we have 6 million unfilled jobs, lowest unemployment in 20 years, roughly. And so there's many opportunities out there. Over the last 3 hearings, this subcommittee has heard from employers across the country and across industries that are facing a shortage of workers: welders, nurses, technicians, truck drivers. And our investment in TANF is obviously meant to support work. And I want to make sure that TANF dollars are being used for their intended purposes, and I think that's part of what this committee is looking at. And that states aren't taking advantage by diverting funds to fill state budget holes or other purposes. And you alluded to this a little bit in your opening. What is your sense on how states are using TANF dollars now, and whether those dollars are really going to support work, and what should we be doing from a public policy standpoint to ensure this?
So the fiscal incentive that the states have by moving people into employment that leads to a lower caseload, and then being able to take those excess federal dollars that used to be spent on benefits and the original caseload and invested in other things is a good thing. I like the idea that states can have some flexibility with dollars they save by helping people move to work. It looks, though, now as if that's gone a little too far, and that there is not enough dollars being redirected or focused on the remaining caseload, which may have more difficult and significant issues than the caseload that existed in 1995, and needs a little additional effort. So my sense is that it would be a good thing if the Congress could impose greater restrictions on the use of dollars. The limitation to families under 200% of poverty is a good idea. So my sense is that now I come from a state, New York, that invests a lot and does a lot, but you know, even we could be a little more focused on the existing caseload.
And you would say that recommendation, the 200%, is the first step to take in that? Are there any others?
I think that's a good one. I think that's a pretty solid one. The other way, the one thing I worry about is if you don't have a performance measure that you're going to hold states accountable with potential penalties on engagement. In other words, that there's going to be, you're going to hold accountable on how many hours or how many activities or something that you're doing with each and every one of the adults on your caseload. States will not do what they need to do. And so I think that'd be the second thing, is have it not just be about placement and employment, but also on some limitation, some requirement, you know, I'm from the state, but I think sometimes it's good to hold us accountable and make us have to do that paperwork reporting that asserts to the federal government that we did what you asked us to do, which was to focus on engaging people in need in activities that will lead to work.
I got you. Ms. Meeks, Ellis, do you have any comment on that?
Well, again, I think that over time, the performance metrics have changed quite significantly from the aid-dependent children days to the TANF days that we're in now. I think that states do all that they can, especially in Ohio. We're doing all that we can to better engage these individuals and make sure, again, around the focus with case management, because we're spending dollars, but we want those dollars to be spent wisely. So again, to help somebody transition, we want to be working with those that are the most barriered and helping those individuals overcome what it is that's keeping them from employment. I know with WIOA, when WIOA was passed in 2014, there was guidelines there placed that want us to work with those that are more barriered, both adults and youth. So I think that transitioning this, we do need to have some state requirements that is focusing on those that are most in need.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I next recognize Mr. Rice for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I come from South Carolina, and South Carolina is doing well. The economy is lifting South Carolina like it's lifting the rest of the country. I have 8 counties in my district. Most of those counties are also experiencing this buoyant lift of our economy. Economies at GDP growth is above 3%, which a lot of people said we wouldn't get back to. And number of unemployment claims are at 50-year lows. Unemployment itself is at 20-year lows. Yet I've got 3 counties in my district, 3 of my 8 counties that they've struggled for decades. In fact, Dillon County, South Carolina, President Obama, when he was running the first time, stopped there and stopped at an old school and put a little child in his lap and talked about how, these people had been left behind. Well, that same county, Dillon County, South Carolina, the state of South Carolina just opened the Dillon Inland Port, which is a place where trucks coming down I-95 can pull off the highway and offload rather than having to drive all the way into the middle of South Carolina and down to the port and creating traffic and pollution and all these other things. And that if they get it there by 5 o'clock in the evening, it'll be on the ship the next day. Now, what that does is it attracts exporters and importers. They opened one of these in Greer about 3 or 4 years ago, and 5 years ago, it's created 3,000 jobs. So this one in Dillon County has already created 1,100 jobs. We've got employers screaming for employees right here in the middle of these 3 very impoverished counties. These counties have unemployment rates that are at least 50% higher than the state average. Their income, average income, median family income is 2/3 of the state average. 30% of the people live in poverty, twice the state average. They've got declining populations because people historically have had to leave because there wasn't anything there for them. So, given all that, and given that we've got 3 fine technical schools in my district, 2 of which serve these 3 counties, and you can go for free. It's not, that tuition is a barrier. They're free. And their placement rates are 100% in what these things are, welding and electrical and plumbing and machining, 100% placement rate. And you know what the problem is? They can't get people to sign up. It's a fascinating thing. Opportunity has been restored. Education is provided. And they can't get people to sign up. So here's my question. How do you break this generational cycle? This feeling that, you should rely on government assistance to take care of you. How do you break that and get people to recognize, I don't think they trust, when we say there's opportunities for you, they don't believe opportunities for them. How do you break that cycle and get these people re-engaged?
Imposing a requirement on those who receive assistance that they need to do something in return for receiving that assistance, like participate in an activity that could lead to work, like going to work, like going to training and education, having that expectation in benefit programs. That's one way. There are other ways involving promoting stronger families, doing a better job in education, but it is part of, the members are absolutely correct. In efforts to fight poverty, the strong economy and the availability of jobs is tremendously helpful. It's a great thing, and it is happening. Employers are reaching and hiring people they didn't used to. But we also have to have our benefit or assistance programs helping also by encouraging and pushing people who are receiving assistance who could work into employment.
I would offer also that what we're seeing through, again, a more intensive case management process is that we are working with individuals, as Nisha had mentioned. It's a deterrent when a state looks at the parameters for work participation. I think when we allow people to have an opportunity to go to training and not worry that it's not going to meet a federal requirement, that we need to work with those families, and especially with our younger people, to understand that there's an opportunity here that's unreal, that you can get some very short-term training. I mean, LPNs, 14 months, you're making $18 to $20 in my area. Other trainings that may take 2 years, but still you're coming out with very little debt, and you're making, you know, really, really good money, especially in the trades and the skilled trades. So I think that with the case management aspect of working with families and individuals who certainly need a job, but they also need an opportunity to really sit down with somebody to explain what's available in the market, what training do you need to secure that opportunity, what's it going to pay. That's the things that the workforce are expert in. And that's one of the nice things that we've seen with this blending under our comprehensive case management program, is we have a workforce flavor to this, but it encompasses so much more than just putting somebody at a job site and working off 20 or 30 hours a week. It's really intensely looking at that person's skills, their interests, their abilities, their barriers, and bringing it together, meeting them where they are and helping them move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you to all of our witnesses. Your insight and certainly the expertise that I mentioned earlier is valuable. This is a conversation that is ongoing as we address meeting the needs of the neediest among us, as I mentioned earlier. And I appreciate the conversation that we've already had. Look forward to more. And certainly if you would like to add to your testimony in writing, feel free to do so. Please be advised that members will have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.